Ava Langston sat in first class, seat 1A of the transatlantic flight, her face flushed with exhaustion and desperation as her 9-month-old daughter Luna screamed at the top of her lungs. For nearly 4 hours, every passenger on the plane had been subjected to relentless crying that no amount of money, influence, or technological brilliance seemed able to stop. Ava had tried everything. She'd walked the aisles singing lullabies, offered Luna bottles that were rejected violently, changed her diaper in cramped airplane bathrooms, and even played white noise through the cabin speakers. Nothing worked. The other first-class passengers were shooting her increasingly hostile looks, and they knew exactly who she was. Flight attendants offered suggestions that failed miserably. An older businessman muttered loud enough for her to hear, "Maybe she needs her father." A socialite with perfect makeup added salt to the wound. Some people think money buys parenting skills. Even the pilot's subtle announcement about ensuring passenger comfort felt directed at her specifically. The woman who'd taken a company public at 32, the visionary who turned artificial intelligence into global gold, couldn't figure out how to quiet her own child. That's when something unthinkable happened. Ava Langston was the youngest founder to take Langston Innovations public, a company worth $6 billion that specialized in AI-driven predictive analytics and machine learning. At 35, she had conquered investor meetings with brilliant boardroom tactics, navigated hostile takeover attempts, and revolutionized an entire industry. But she had never conquered this: the sound of her daughter's pain. Luna's crying wasn't just noise. It was the embodiment of everything Ava couldn't control. Every wail felt like a small indictment. "You abandoned me for work. You don't know me. You don't know how to mother." The guilt was compounded by circumstance. Ava's marriage to Elliot Crane, a media tycoon, had imploded during her pregnancy. He cheated publicly, humiliated her in tabloid headlines, and disappeared from Luna's life before she was even born. When Ava had discovered the truth 3 days after labor, she'd made the choice to raise Luna alone rather than entangle her daughter with a man incapable of loyalty. Yet sitting in first class, surrounded by judgment, Ava wondered if she'd made the wrong choice about everything. The flight was supposed to be smooth. Ava was traveling to London for a series of critical board meetings with European investors, a deal that could expand Langston Innovations into 3 new markets and solidify her legacy. She'd hired the best nanny available. But the woman had called in sick at the last moment with flu symptoms, leaving Ava with an impossible choice: reschedule the most important deal of her career, or bring Luna on the flight. Her mother would have known what to do. Ava's mother, Eleanor, had died when Ava was 16. A sudden heart attack that had fractured something irreparable inside her. Eleanor had been the only person who could calm Ava during childhood tantrums, who sang lullabies that seemed to reach into the darkest parts of a child's heart. Ava had internalized that loss by becoming the opposite: controlled, logical, unshakable. She'd built an empire on the principle that emotions were obstacles to solve, not feelings to understand. Now, at 35,000 feet, that philosophy was crumbling. Luna's screaming reached a crescendo that made Ava's ears ring. Her designer blouse was soaked. Her diamond studs caught the dim cabin light but offered no comfort. Around her, the first-class cabin had transformed from a sanctuary of luxury into something claustrophobic, a stage where her failure was on full display. How hard can it be to manage a baby for a 5-day business trip? Richard Whittaker had asked his wife. Ava had asked herself the same thing. The answer was crushing, impossible. For 2 more hours, Ava tried everything the flight attendants suggested. She tried swaddling Luna differently. She tried walking her in different rhythms. She even tried singing the lullaby her mother had sung to her, the one she'd thought was lost forever. But her voice cracked with emotion and Luna cried harder. The businessman in seat 1B, Harold Morrison, began checking his watch dramatically every 30 seconds, sighing with theatrical annoyance. Victoria Sterling, a socialite Ava recognized from New York charity galas, was typing aggressively on her phone, her finger jabs punctuating her obvious complaints about the inconsiderate billionaire ruining everyone's flight. Ava felt something break inside her. Not her composure, but something deeper. The understanding that all her power, all her wealth, all her brilliance meant nothing in this moment. She couldn't buy her way out of her daughter's pain. She couldn't hack a solution. She couldn't negotiate with a 9-month-old's distress. She felt, for the first time in years, completely helpless. Hello, my family and friends. It's nice having you here today again on this amazing story. Now if you are hooked already by it, kindly like the video, comment where you are watching from, and what time it's at your end. And if you have not subscribed, please help subscribe to the channel, so you can be updated always when we drop beautiful stories like this. Now let's continue. That's when a small voice cut through the chaos like a bell. "Mommy, the baby's sad." It came from economy class. From a little girl no older than 2, dressed in a sunflower hoodie that seemed to glow against the fluorescent cabin lights. The child was perched on her mother's lap, her big brown eyes filled with concern that felt impossibly mature for a toddler. The child's mother hushed her gently. "I know, baby, but it's not our business." But the little girl tilted her head, studying Luna with an intensity that transcended age. "She crying too long. I can help." Ava watched through blurred eyes as the flight attendant looked confused. No one traveled from economy to first class without permission. No one broke the invisible social barrier between classes at 35,000 feet. But this little girl did. She slid down from her seat, clutching a tattered plush bunny, and began toddling down the aisle with the confidence of someone who understood something the rest of them didn't. Passengers whispered. Some scoffed. "Whose child is that?" a businessman asked incredulously. The flight attendant called out, "Ma'am, your daughter." But the girl's mother could only sigh, half embarrassed, half amused, as her daughter approached first class. Ava looked up through tears she hadn't realized were forming. In front of her stood a tiny girl, wide-eyed and brave, holding out her plush bunny. "She can have him," Zara said solemnly. "Bunny makes the sad go away." Ava's throat tightened. "Oh, sweetheart, that's so kind." But, before she could finish, Zara placed her small hand on Luna's leg. "Shoo," she whispered. "It okay, baby. Don't cry. Bunny's here." And then the impossible happened. Luna's cries began to fade. Her sobs turned to hiccups. Then complete silence. The entire cabin froze. 200 passengers held their breath, waiting to see if this peace would last. The woman who'd complained earlier now stared, mouth open in disbelief. Flight attendants exchanged stunned glances. Harold Morrison put down his phone. Victoria Sterling stopped mid-keystroke. Zara began to hum. A soft, rhythmic melody that Ava had never heard before. A gentle tune that seemed to cradle the very air itself. Luna's eyes, which had been squeezed shut in distress for hours, slowly opened and focused on the little girl's face. For the first time since takeoff, she smiled. Ava's vision blurred. She hadn't cried in years. Not through the divorce, not through hostile board takeovers, not even at her mentor's funeral. But this moment cracked something deep inside her. Something she'd spent 20 years sealing shut. How did you do that?" Ava whispered, her voice unfamiliar to her own ears. Zara shrugged like it was nothing. "Bunny helps me too, when my belly hurts. And the song is from Grandma. She says it make angels listen." Zara's mother rushed forward, mortified. "Oh my goodness, I am so sorry, Ms. Langston. I swear she doesn't usually." Ava raised a trembling hand gently. "Don't apologize. She's the only one who's been able to help." Everyone watched as Luna reached up, grasping the little girl's fingers and gurgling contentedly. The sound Ava had been desperate to hear for hours. The billionaire and the toddler, worlds apart, separated by class and circumstance, sharing a silent understanding that no amount of adult experience could explain. 3 rows back in economy class, Zara King sat perched on her mother's lap, her small frame swallowed by a bright yellow hoodie embroidered with a sunflower so vibrant it seemed to pulse with its own light. At 2 years old, Zara possessed the kind of stillness that made strangers stare. Not the stillness of a passive child, but the attentiveness of someone listening to frequencies the rest of the world couldn't hear. Her mother, Monique King, held her daughter's small hand gently as Luna's cries echoed through the cabin for the 100th time. Monique was accustomed to scrutiny. She'd spent her entire life navigating spaces where she didn't quite belong, where her presence, her blackness, her modest clothes from Target, her practical hairstyle, seemed to apologize for itself. But in this moment, as a billionaire's child screamed through first class, Monique felt something shift. The judgment wasn't aimed at her anymore. "Mommy, the baby's sad," Zara said softly, her voice cutting through the noise like a tuning fork finding its frequency. Monique pulled her daughter closer. "I know, sweetheart, but we can't help with that." Across the aisle, Monique's husband Darius sat reviewing documents on his phone. Printouts of medical research, neuroscience papers highlighted in yellow, notes scrawled in the margins. They were flying to London for a reason that had consumed their family's entire world for the past 6 months. Zara's evaluation at the Institute for Neurological Development. The specialists there believed Zara possessed something rare, a neurological condition they were calling tonal empathy, the ability to detect emotional frequencies in sound waves with preternatural accuracy. To Monique, it was simpler. Her daughter could hear what people felt. "She crying too long?" Zara said again, with the gentle insistence of a child who understood something adults had forgotten. "I can help." Monique exchanged a glance with Darius. They'd been warned about this. Dr. Morrison had mentioned it during their last appointment. Zara's empathetic response to distress signals may be compulsive. She may feel driven to intervene, even when it's inappropriate. "Baby, that's kind." But Zara was already sliding down from her mother's lap, her small fingers gripping the plush bunny she'd named Bun Bun. A toy so worn its original color had faded to soft pastels. The bunny had been a gift from her grandmother Rosa, Darius's mother, and it had traveled everywhere with Zara, to doctor's appointments, to therapy sessions, to the emergency room visit when Zara's empathetic overload had caused her first sensory meltdown. "Zara, no, come back," Monique whispered urgently, reaching for her daughter. But Zara was already toddling toward the boundary between economy and first class, her sunflower hoodie bobbing like a small beacon. Passengers began to notice. A businessman in 14C nudged his companion. A woman in 15A whispered something to her seatmate. The flight attendant at the divider, a woman with kind eyes but a practiced, professional smile, looked up from her tablet with visible confusion. "Excuse me, sweetheart," the attendant said gently. "Where's your mother?" Zara didn't stop. She didn't answer with words. Instead, she kept moving forward, drawn by something invisible to everyone else. The specific pitch of Luna's cry, a frequency that made something in Zara's small nervous system ache with recognition. Luna's scream reached a crescendo. Zara flinched slightly but didn't turn back. The first-class cabin erupted in whispers. "Is she alone? Where are her parents? Should someone stop her?" The businessman in seat 1B raised his eyebrows skeptically, his disapproval palpable. The socialite in 3B paused her aggressive phone typing to stare. Monique was on her feet now, moving with careful speed down the economy aisle, her heart hammering. Darius stood as well, ready to retrieve his daughter, though something in his expression suggested he understood this wasn't an interruption. It was an inevitability. The flight attendant looked between Zara and Monique with a mixture of professionalism and concern. "Ma'am, But Zara had already reached the threshold of first class. And there she stood, a 2-year-old girl in a sunflower hoodie, holding a tattered plush bunny, facing down a billionaire woman whose entire world was crumbling at 35,000 feet. Ava looked up through tears, her eyes meeting Zara's for the first time. There was no judgment in that small face, no awareness of class or status or the invisible walls that separated them. There was only understanding, recognition, the kind that transcends everything humans build to divide themselves. Zara stepped closer. "She can have him," Zara said solemnly, extending Bun Bun toward Luna, her small voice steady and sure. "Bunny makes the sad go away." Ava's breath caught. Her hand trembled as she reached toward the offered toy, toward the small girl who had crossed every invisible boundary to help a stranger. "Oh, sweetheart, that's so kind." But before Ava could finish, Zara placed her small hand on Luna's leg and leaned close. "Shoo!" she whispered, her voice becoming something almost musical. "It okay, baby. Don't cry. Bunny's here. Ava's first instinct was to protect, to gently redirect this small child back to her seat, to explain kindly that Luna's distress wasn't something a 2-year-old could fix, to restore order to the chaos of this moment. "Oh, sweetheart, that's very kind. But," Ava began, her voice soft but trembling with the weight of 4 hours of helplessness. But Zara didn't hesitate. She didn't wait for permission or reassurance. With the intuitive certainty of a child who understood something adults had spent lifetimes forgetting, Zara placed her small hand gently on Luna's leg. Not grabbing, not demanding, simply touching with absolute presence. "Shoo!" she whispered. And then she began to hum. It wasn't a lullaby exactly. It was something older than lullabies, something that seemed to exist in the space between sound and silence. The melody moved like water, fluid, patient, inevitably finding the lowest point. Zara's voice was thin and pure, a frequency that seemed to bypass the ears entirely and speak directly to something trembling and fragile in the nervous system. Luna's screaming faltered. For a moment, nothing changed. Ava held her breath. The entire cabin seemed to hold its breath with her. 200 people suspended in collective disbelief, waiting to see if this impossible quiet would hold or shatter. Then Luna hiccuped. Once, twice. Her tiny fists, which had been clenched in rage and discomfort, uncurled like small flowers opening to light. The screaming stopped. Complete, absolute silence fell across the cabin. Not the absence of sound, but the presence of something else entirely. Something that felt sacred. Zara continued humming the listening song as her grandmother had called it, a melody that seemed to exist outside of time. Luna's eyes, which had been squeezed shut in distress, slowly, impossibly, opened. They focused on Zara's face, and the transformation was instantaneous. The tension that had twisted Luna's features into anguish began to soften. Her breathing deepened. Her body, rigid with months of undetermined discomfort, released. For the first time since takeoff, Luna smiled. The cabin erupted, not in noise, but in something more profound. A collective exhale. A shift in the atmosphere so tangible it felt like the air pressure had changed. Harold Morrison, the businessman who had muttered his disdain about children in first class, stared with his mouth slightly open. His skepticism transformed into something approaching wonder. Victoria Sterling put down her phone entirely, a gesture equivalent to laying down arms. The flight attendants exchanged glances that conveyed something between amazement and the recognition that they just witnessed something beyond their professional scope. But Ava felt something break open inside her chest. Tears spilled down her cheeks without permission, without the carefully controlled moisture of someone who was managing. These were tears of surrender, of witnessing something she couldn't control or understand or purchase. They were the tears of a woman whose armor had finally, mercifully, cracked. She reached out tentatively, her hand hovering above Zara's small frame as if she might disappear at any moment. How did you do that?" Ava whispered, her voice barely audible over Zara's continuing hum. Zara tilted her head slightly, her big brown eyes meeting Ava's with a clarity that seemed impossible for a 2-year-old. She didn't stop humming. Instead, she gently took Luna's small hand and placed it on her own heart, so the baby could feel the vibration of the song resonating through her small body. "She just needed someone to listen," Zara said simply, returning her focus to Luna, whose hiccups had faded entirely. Behind them, Monique appeared, breathless, mortified, moving quickly down the aisle toward her daughter. "Oh my goodness, I am so sorry, Ms. Langston. I swear she doesn't usually. We didn't mean to interrupt." Ava raised a hand gently, not turning away from Zara and Luna. "Don't apologize. I'm terribly sorry about the disruption, truly. Don't apologize," Ava repeated, her voice stronger now, though her eyes never left the 2 children before her. "She's the only one who's been able to help." The words hung in the air like a confession. Monique stopped moving, stopped apologizing, and simply witnessed what was happening. A billionaire on her knees, metaphorically and almost literally, surrendering to the extraordinary gift of a child from economy class. Luna reached up, grasping Zara's fingers and gurgling contentedly. A sound so small and pure it felt like the entire flight had been leading to this exact moment. Zara smiled, that knowing smile of a child who understood what everyone else was still trying to comprehend. In that moment, the plush bunny, worn, faded, tattered with love, remained clasped in Luna's small hand. It was no longer just a toy. It had become the bridge between two worlds. Between privilege and innocence, between control and surrender, between the woman who thought she had to do everything and the child who understood that sometimes the most powerful thing was simply to listen. The billionaire and the toddler, separated by class, by circumstance, by every invisible wall society had erected, shared a silence that said everything. The cabin settled into a peace that felt almost unnatural after hours of turbulence. Luna dozed peacefully in Ava's arms, her small body releasing into the kind of deep sleep that comes only after profound distress has finally lifted. She was still holding Bun Bun, her small fingers curled around the bunny's worn fabric as if it were the most precious thing she owned. Ava couldn't look away from her daughter's face. When the initial shock had faded, Ava had made an impulsive decision. She'd leaned toward Monique and offered, her voice still shaky from tears, "Please sit here, in the empty seats across from me. Let me thank you properly." Monique had exchanged a glance with Darius, the kind of look that married couples develop over years of wordless communication, and gently declined. "We're comfortable in economy, Ms. Langston. Really. Zara needs to stay in her seat and honestly, we're fine where we are." There was no resentment in her refusal, but Ava heard something beneath it, a quiet assertion of dignity. The Kings didn't need Ava's first-class seats to validate their worth. They didn't need to be elevated into a different social stratosphere to matter. Ava had nodded and let them return to economy class, but something in her had shifted irrevocably. For the next 3 hours, as the cabin lights dimmed and most passengers drifted into the half-sleep of long-haul travel, Ava found herself unable to stop watching the Kings. Specifically, she watched Monique. The way Monique held Zara as the child drifted off to sleep. The way she adjusted the yellow sunflower hoodie so it wouldn't bunch uncomfortably under Zara's neck. The way she sang, softly, almost to herself, while stroking Zara's hair in a rhythm that seemed to match her heartbeat. There was no performance in it, no efficiency, no sense that Monique was doing this because it was required or optimal or best practice. She was simply present. Completely, without reservation, present. Ava felt something twist in her chest. When had she last held Luna like that? Not while checking her phone. Not while mentally running through London meeting agendas. Not while calculating the ROI of time spent on motherhood versus time spent building her empire. The answer was, she couldn't remember. In the seat across the aisle, Darius sat reading medical documents, the same stack of papers Ava had noticed earlier, but his hand rested on Zara's leg. Not gripping, just touching, staying connected even while doing something else, maintaining that thread of presence that said, "I'm here." Ava's mind drifted backward, to a time before Langston Innovations, before the divorce, before she'd become a woman who measured her worth in market capitalization and technological innovation. She was 16, sitting in a hospital room that smelled like antiseptic and death. Her mother, Eleanor, lay in the bed with the composed expression of someone already halfway gone. Eleanor had always been the opposite of powerful in the way the world measured it. She'd been a librarian, an artist, a woman who noticed the small things that everyone else rushed past. "Ava," Eleanor had whispered, her voice thin as paper. "Come closer." Ava had climbed into the hospital bed, and Eleanor had done what she'd done Ava's entire life. She'd sung. Not a famous lullaby. Something Eleanor had created herself, a melody that felt like being held. "When the world gets too loud, sweetheart, remember, there's a quiet place inside you that no one can touch. That's where you're safe. That's where you're enough." Ava had cried then, understanding somehow that this was the last time Eleanor would sing to her. She'd never cried the same way again. After Eleanor died, Ava had made a choice, though she hadn't understood it as a choice at the time. She'd decided that safety meant control, that enough meant earning it, that the quiet place inside her was a luxury she couldn't afford if she was going to survive a world that was relentlessly loud and relentlessly demanding. So she'd built an empire instead. Now, at 35,000 feet, watching Monique hold their sleeping daughter, Ava understood the cost of that choice with a clarity that felt like grief. Luna stirred slightly, and Ava adjusted her position automatically, instinctively, the way she'd learned from YouTube videos and parenting books rather than from lived experience. Luna's eyes fluttered but didn't open. She made a small sound. Not quite a word, not quite a cry, and Ava's entire body responded to it. This was her daughter. This small person who'd been inside her body, who carried her DNA, who needed her in ways that no amount of money or success could substitute for. And Ava had treated motherhood like a problem to be optimized rather than a relationship to be lived. Across the aisle, Zara was completely asleep now, her small body folded against Monique's chest like she was the safest place in the world. Monique had rested her cheek against the top of Zara's head, and even in sleep, her hand moved in gentle circles on her daughter's back. Ava watched them and felt something crystallize inside her. Not an epiphany, exactly, but a recognition, a reckoning. Zara had crossed the barrier between economy and first class not because she was extraordinary. She was extraordinary because she had something Ava had spent decades trying to engineer. The absolute certainty that she was loved, completely and unconditionally. That certainty was what had given a 2-year-old the courage to approach a billionaire. That certainty was what had allowed her to hear Luna's cry as an invitation rather than a threat. That certainty was peace. Ava looked down at Luna's sleeping face and made a silent promise. I'm going to learn how to listen the way your mother taught me, even if it meant unlearning everything she'd built. The wheels touched down at Heathrow with barely a tremor. Ava had expected to feel relief. The meetings, the expansion deal, the carefully orchestrated European strategy all waiting to unfold. Instead, she felt only an urgent need that superseded every scheduled obligation. She had to find the kings before they disappeared into the machinery of customs and international travel. Luna was awake now, gurgling softly in Ava's arms, still clutching the tattered bunny, as the cabin erupted into the organized chaos of deplaning. Overhead bins opening, passengers gathering belongings, the sudden shift from stillness to motion. Ava moved with uncharacteristic haste. She didn't wait for the first-class priority exit. She carried Luna through the terminal with purpose, her eyes scanning the crowds for a bright yellow sunflower hoodie. She found them at baggage claim, looking slightly overwhelmed by the scale of Heathrow's terminal. Monique and Darius standing with 2 small suitcases that had clearly seen better years. Zara perched on Darius's shoulders, her head swiveling with the wonder of a child seeing a new world for the first time. Please, Ava said, approaching them, her voice cutting through the airport noise with the same clarity that had once commanded boardrooms. Please don't say no. I need to thank you properly. Monique turned, surprise flickering across her face. For a moment there was a hesitation, the natural resistance of people unaccustomed to being sought out by billionaires in airport terminals. There's no need, ma'am, Monique said gently. Kids just see things differently. But Darius was already setting Zara down, and Ava could see it in his expression. He understood that this wasn't politeness. This was necessity. They found a quieter corner near the arrivals lounge, away from the crush of travelers. Ava knelt so she was eye level with Zara, and Luna reached out, her small hand finding Zara's. The 2 children looked at each other with the recognition of soldiers who had survived something together. That song, Ava said, still on her knees. What is it called? Zara thought for a moment, her head tilted in that characteristic way. Grandma calls it the listening song. It's for when hearts are loud. When hearts are loud. The phrase seemed to contain entire universes. Monique smiled softly. Zara's always been sensitive to sound. When she was a baby, the doctors ran all these tests. They said she has what they call tonal empathy. She paused, choosing her words carefully. She doesn't just hear sounds. She feels the emotions inside them. She can tell when someone's upset just by listening to the pitch of their voice. Sometimes it overwhelms her, actually. Her nervous system picks up on frequencies that most people filter out. Darius added, his voice thoughtful. We've been working with specialists at the Institute in London. They're researching whether this kind of emotional auditory perception can be trained, developed, maybe even taught. Ava felt something shift in her understanding. Not a small adjustment, but a fundamental reorganization of how she'd been thinking about what happened on that flight. She doesn't just hear the crying, Ava whispered, the realization moving through her like current. She hears the feeling behind it. Yes, Monique said simply. That's exactly right. They stood in silence for a moment, 3 adults and 2 children, while travelers rushed past them pulling luggage. Ava's mind was moving through the implications at the speed she usually reserved for algorithm analysis and market projections. But this time, the algorithm was emotional rather than financial. Zara hadn't been attempting a rescue. She hadn't been trying to fix Luna's cry through technique or strategy or optimization. She had simply recognized the emotion crying out underneath the sound, the loneliness, the overwhelm, the helplessness, and responded to that truth. Can I ask you something? Ava said, her voice quieter now. What makes Zara? How does she know what to do when she hears someone's distress? Most people hear that and they shut down. They run. They judge. But Zara, she listens, Darius said simply. And then she responds with presence rather than solutions. I think that's what doctors don't understand about her gift. It's not just that she can hear emotions. It's that she doesn't try to fix them. She just stays with them. Some hearts don't speak in words, Ms. Langston, Monique added, and there was something almost lyrical in the way she said it. They cry in sound. My mother, Zara's grandmother. She always said that the most ignored language in the world is the one the body speaks. Most of us learn to talk over it, to ignore it, to treat it like noise. Ava looked down at Luna, who was now holding hands with Zara, while they both watched a carousel of luggage rotate endlessly. I've spent my entire life listening to noise, Ava said quietly. Market noise, investor noise, the noise of my own ambition and fear. But I don't think I've ever actually listened to. She trailed off, unsure how to name what she meant. To feeling, Monique offered gently. To feeling, Ava repeated. To the actual human being underneath the sound. She looked back at Zara, who had begun humming softly. Not the listening song, but something new, something spontaneous. A melody that seemed to bloom from pure presence. Zara reminded me, Ava said, her voice steady now with the kind of certainty that comes from profound truth, that I've been listening to the world's noise, not its feelings, and that maybe that's been the real problem all along. The press release went live on a Tuesday morning in May, exactly 1 month after Heathrow. Langston Innovations launches the Listening Hearts Project. $50 million initiative funds emotional sound therapy and early listening education in underserved communities. Within hours, the financial media was in a frenzy. Tech billionaire pivots to feelings. Read the headline in Forbes. CNBC ran a segment titled, Is Ava Langston losing her edge? Investment analysts questioned whether the woman who'd built an empire on predictive algorithms was now predictably losing focus. On Twitter, the speculation raged. Was this a tax write-off? PR stunt? Had something happened on that London trip that had broken her? None of them understood. The Listening Hearts Project was structured across 3 pillars. The first funded neuroscience research into tonal empathy, what Zara possessed, and whether emotional auditory perception could be identified early in childhood development. The second pillar established listening centers in economically disadvantaged neighborhoods, offering free emotional sound therapy sessions and training for parents and caregivers. The third, and most radical, was an educational curriculum designed to teach children and adults what Zara already knew. How to listen not just with their ears, but with their nervous systems. We've optimized everything, Ava had written in the proposal draft, except our capacity for presence. She'd written that sentence while sitting in her penthouse, holding Luna on her lap at midnight, both of them bathed in the soft light of London's skyline. Luna had been asleep, her small body warm against Ava's chest, and Ava had found herself unable to put her daughter down. For weeks, she'd been unable to put her down. The old Ava, the version of herself that had existed before a 2-year-old in a sunflower hoodie had crossed an invisible barrier, would have found childcare and returned to the constant motion of leadership meetings and investor calls. But something had reorganized itself in Ava's brain during that month. Time had become precious in a way money had never quite managed. She'd canceled 3 board calls, rescheduled the European expansion indefinitely, brought in a co-CEO to handle the day-to-day operations of Langston Innovations, a decision that had shocked her own team more than any market downturn ever could. "You're delegating?" her VP of operations had asked, genuinely confused. "I'm learning how to listen," Ava had replied simply. The Listening Hearts project proposal had come together in fragments. Ava would draft a section while Luna napped. She'd revise another while humming, not quite the listening song, but an attempt at something similar. She'd sat with the medical literature on tonal empathy, but she'd also sat with something more important: the memory of her mother's voice in that hospital room, singing about a quiet place inside her that no one could touch. She'd realized that Zara's gift wasn't unusual because it was rare. It was unusual because it was so desperately needed. The world was full of noise. Algorithmic noise, digital noise, the constant screaming of a society that had forgotten how to listen. Children were growing up in environments designed to fragment their attention, to treat silence as something to be feared rather than a space to be inhabited. And parents, overwhelmed and exhausted, were passing down the same fracturing they'd inherited. Zara had simply reversed that inheritance with a lullaby. The media's bewilderment actually amused Ava. Business journalists kept framing it as a pivot, as though she'd suddenly abandoned her intelligence in favor of sentimentality. They didn't understand that this was intelligence, a different kind applied to a different problem. Why? A journalist from the New York Times had asked during a preliminary interview, would someone who built an empire on artificial intelligence suddenly fund emotional intelligence? Ava had smiled. Because I realized I'd spent 20 years building technology to help us understand data, and I'd never spent a single day learning how to understand each other. As the launch date approached, Ava sat down to write the keynote speech for the Listening Hearts Project's official announcement. The speech would be delivered at a gala in the Langston Innovations headquarters, filled with tech luminaries, philanthropists, and press from around the world. She started and stopped a dozen times. Every corporate phrase she'd mastered, disruption, innovation, scalability, felt hollow now. They were words designed to excite investors, not to illuminate truth. Finally, she began again. 1 month ago, I was lost. I was sitting in first class on a transatlantic flight with my 9-month-old daughter, convinced that my inability to comfort her was a personal failure. I'd optimized my career. I'd engineered my company. I'd become extraordinarily good at everything except the most important thing: being present. Then a 2-year-old girl from economy class taught me what presence actually means. She didn't fix my daughter's pain. She didn't offer solutions or strategies. She simply listened, with complete attention, with her whole nervous system, and in that listening, she created a space where pain could transform into peace. That's what the Listening Hearts Project is about. Not fixing, not optimizing, but creating spaces, in our schools, our communities, our homes, where people can be truly heard. As Ava wrote, she thought of Zara, of Monique's hand on her daughter's back in the airplane, of Darius reading medical papers while staying connected, of Rosa's lullaby moving through generations like a song that refused to be forgotten. She thought of her own mother, Eleanor, singing in a hospital room about the quiet place inside her that no one could touch. And she understood, finally, that the most powerful technology she would ever build wouldn't be in code or algorithms or artificial intelligence. It would be in listening, in presence, in the sacred space between one heart and another, where silence itself became a language. The cabin of the transatlantic flight was identical to the one from 6 months ago. Same airline, same route from London back to New York, same first-class rows. But everything was different. Ava boarded with Luna on her hip, and instead of the rigid tension that had characterized the previous flight, there was an ease between them. Luna was 14 months old now, walking but still unsteady, and she reached for her mother with complete trust. Ava didn't check her phone as they settled into the seats. She didn't review contracts or scan financial reports. She simply sat with her daughter, watching the crew move through their pre-flight preparations, and felt something like peace. The passenger in seat 1B wasn't Harold Morrison this time. It was a woman who smiled warmly at Luna, who cooed at the toddler without judgment or hostility. The socialite seat was empty, no judgment waiting to happen. Everything had changed except the flight itself. As they taxied toward the runway, Ava found herself slipping into memory, not deliberately, but the way one does when standing on the edge of where they used to be. She could almost hear Luna's screams echoing through this same cabin, could feel the weight of those 4 hours like they'd happened yesterday rather than half a year ago. The helplessness, the desperation, the moment when she'd realized that billions of dollars and decades of ambition meant nothing when faced with a child's pain. The transformation felt radical now. Impossible that she'd been that woman, and impossible that she hadn't. The flight reached cruising altitude smoothly. Luna had already dozed off, her small hand clasped around Ava's finger. Ava was gazing out the window at the Atlantic stretching endlessly below when a voice interrupted her thoughts. "Excuse me, are you Ava Langston?" Ava turned to see a woman in her 30s, laptop closed, eyes bright with recognition. There was something familiar in her face, a journalist perhaps, someone who'd interviewed her about the Listening Hearts project. "I am," Ava said, turning slightly without disturbing Luna. "I thought so. I'm Sarah Chun. I write for The Atlantic. We met briefly at the project launch in June." She paused, then asked carefully, "Is it true that your foundation was inspired by a child on a plane?" "I've heard rumors, but the official story is vague." Ava smiled, a genuine smile that came from somewhere deeper than politeness. "It's true. A child who heard what none of us could. She was 2 years old, and she understood something that took me 35 years to begin to comprehend." "What did she understand?" Sarah leaned forward, professional curiosity mixing with something more genuine. "That listening is a form of love," Ava said simply. "And that presence is the most revolutionary technology we have." Sarah nodded slowly, as if filing this away, and then discreetly returned to her laptop. But Ava could see her typing, documenting the moment, the conversation, the woman who'd pivoted her entire empire toward the invisible language of empathy. The flight continued. Ava drifted in and out of a half-sleep, the familiar rhythm of high-altitude travel lulling her into that liminal space between worlds. Hours passed. The dinner service came and went. Cabin lights dimmed. And then, from somewhere in economy class, a baby began to cry. Ava's eyes opened. It was a different baby. Different airline, different era, different circumstances, but the sound was unmistakable. That particular pitch of infant distress, the kind that speaks to something primal in a parent's nervous system. She waited for the familiar spike of anxiety, for the memories of the last flight to ambush her. Instead, she felt something else entirely, recognition, and underneath it, a smile. She understood now what Zara had understood. The baby wasn't crying to punish or inconvenience. The baby was crying because that was the only language available, the only way to say "I need. I'm overwhelmed. Please help me be less alone." The crying continued for a few minutes. Longer than it should have, longer than any parent wants to hear it. But Ava didn't feel judgment for whoever was trying to manage their overwhelmed child in the cramped confines of economy class. She felt only compassion. She felt what Zara had felt. She felt the desire to listen. Gently, so as not to wake Luna, Ava began to hum. Not a lullaby exactly, but the listening song, the melody Zara's grandmother had taught Monique, and Monique had taught Ava during one of their many conversations since Heathrow. It was simple, ancient, a melody that seemed to exist in the space between sound and silence. She hummed it softly enough that only Luna could really hear it, and Luna, even in sleep, seemed to settle more deeply into rest, her small face peaceful. The baby in economy continued crying for another minute or two, but then, gradually, subtly, the sound shifted, changed. A mother or father must have tried something, found something, discovered their own version of what Zara had known all along. The cabin settled back into the hum of engines and sleeping passengers. Ava looked down at Luna's sleeping face and felt the circle complete itself. 6 months ago, she'd been the desperate parent, surrounded by judgment, certain of her failure. Now she was the woman who understood, who could sit with someone else's crisis without needing to fix it, who could hold space for pain even from rows away. This is what transformation feels like, she thought. Not a sudden rupture, but a slow reorganization. A flight that mirrors the first flight, but with different passengers, different outcomes, different awareness. The plane carried them eastward across the Atlantic. Below, the ocean reflected starlight. Above, the vast indifference of the universe continued its ancient patterns. And inside the cabin, a billionaire held her sleeping daughter and hummed a song she'd learned from a 2-year-old. A song that said, in its wordless way, I am here. You are safe. You are heard. The gala was held in the grand ballroom of the London Langston Innovation Offices. A space designed to impress, all soaring ceilings and geometric lighting that cast everything in sharp relief. 200 of the world's most influential people filled the room. Venture capitalists, neuroscientists, philanthropists, tech luminaries, and media representatives whose job it was to witness and document every moment. Ava stood at the podium, mid-speech, when her assistant caught her eye from the back of the room and nodded subtly. They were here. Ava finished her prepared remarks smoothly. She was practiced enough that her mouth could speak while her attention fractured. And then, without departing from the script entirely, she said something that wasn't on the teleprompter. I'd like to pause for a moment because the most important people in this room have just arrived. The people who inspired every word I'm about to speak. She stepped down from the podium, and the room's attention shifted toward the ballroom entrance where Monique, Darius, and Zara stood slightly bewildered by the sudden focus of 100 eyes. Zara was wearing a sunflower dress now. Not the hoodie, but a proper dress with the same vibrant yellow, the same symbol of hope. She was older, her face fuller with 2.5 years of growth. But her eyes held that same quality of listening, that same ancient awareness. Luna saw her first. "Zaza!" she shouted, one of her first clear words, and she began moving across the ballroom with the determined waddle of a 15-month-old who'd found something she absolutely needed. Ava followed, but Zara didn't wait to be reached. She broke free from her mother's hand and ran. Actually ran, her small feet carrying her across the polished floor with the kind of joyful abandon only children possess, directly into Ava's arms. They collided in an embrace that was unscripted, unphotographed until it wasn't, and completely real. "Zara," Ava breathed, pulling back just enough to look at the little girl. "You remember me?" "Always," Zara said simply. "I listen for your heart." The room fell silent. Even the journalists paused their reflexive note-taking. Luna had reached them now, and Zara scooped her smaller friend into her arms with the confidence of a child who understood intimacy. The two girls held each other, one black, one white, one from economy, one from first class, one from a modest apartment in Southside Chicago, one from a penthouse overlooking London. And in that embrace was every word that the Listening Hearts Project had been trying to say. The photographers exploded into motion. Flashbulbs created a strobe effect across the ballroom. The contrast was obvious now that it was being captured. Not as a story of charity or rescue, but as something more fundamental. Two children, separated by every structural inequality, recognizing each other completely. Two families, one with billions, one with nothing but dignity, standing in the same moment, the same light. Later, Ava would see the photos everywhere. On the cover of Time magazine, across social media, in nonprofit literature and educational materials. The image would become iconic, not because of the contrast, but because of what the contrast revealed. That the most powerful human connection transcends everything we build to separate ourselves. But in the moment, Ava was simply present with Zara. "I have something for you," Zara said, and she reached into a small bag that Monique had been holding. She pulled out a smooth river stone, painted carefully with musical notes in silver and blue. "I painted it," Zara said, pressing it into Ava's palm. "Grandma helped. It's for when hearts get too loud again." Ava's eyes filled with tears, Real tears, the kind that were becoming familiar now, the kind that meant she was actually alive. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for remembering me, for caring about me." "I always listen," Zara said simply. The moment stretched. Ava looked out at the crowd, at the billionaires and investors and media representatives all watching, and she understood viscerally what Zara already knew. That presence was more powerful than any keynote speech. That connection mattered more than credentials. That a painted rock given by a 3-year-old held more wisdom than a room full of PhDs could articulate. She turned back to the microphone, still holding Zara's hand and the painted stone simultaneously. Luna had settled into Monique's arms, the two children occasionally reaching toward each other across the space between their mothers. "I'd like to announce something," Ava said, her voice steady but saturated with emotion. "The Langston Foundation is establishing the Zara King Scholarship for children identified with tonal empathy or other emotional sensory gifts. Full funding for education, research, and development. Because gifts like this, gifts of listening, of presence, of the ability to hear what others can't, deserve to be cultivated and celebrated, not treated as anomalies to be managed." She squeezed Zara's hand gently. "And because this little girl sat in economy class and decided that a stranger's pain was worth crossing invisible boundaries for. That's the kind of human being we need more of in this world." The room erupted. Applause that started in one section and spread like a wave. Camera flashes intensified. Journalists scribbled frantically. The moment was being captured, recorded, transformed into story. But Ava's attention remained on Zara, on the girl who'd taught her that power meant nothing if you couldn't use it to heal, who'd shown her, in the most fundamental way, what listening actually meant. Later, historians would point to this moment as the turning point. The moment when a billionaire tech mogul truly understood that disruption could mean something other than market dominance. That innovation could look like a 2-year-old humming a song that reached inside the chaos and found peace. But Ava simply understood. In that moment, under the ballroom lights with a painted stone in her hand and a child's trust in her heart. This is what it means to be powerful. Not to control, but to steward. Not to solve, but to listen. Not to build monuments, but to witness other people's monuments and help them shine. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday in late November, exactly 8 months after the flight that had changed everything. There was no return address. No postmark indicating where it had been sent from. Just a white envelope with Ava written in careful, adult handwriting on the front. Probably Monique's, Ava thought, but addressed with the kind of intentionality that suggested this wasn't a random mailing. Ava was in her penthouse office overlooking the Thames, reviewing grant applications for the second round of Listening Hearts project funding, when she noticed it among the day's correspondence. She almost missed it. It was thin, clearly handmade, decidedly out of place amid the official letterhead and legal documents that usually filled her mail. She opened it carefully, as if it might be fragile enough to shatter. Inside was a drawing. The paper was construction paper, the kind you buy at any elementary school supply store, the sort of thing a preschooler would use for art class. On it, drawn in crayon with the imperfect precision of small hands, were 2 stick figures. One was tall, with a yellow circle for a head and lines for arms and legs. The other was small, proportionally accurate to a toddler's understanding of scale. They stood beneath a sky that wasn't a simple line but an explosion of musical notes, rendered in blue and purple and gold crayon, floating across the top of the page like they were actually floating. Beneath the drawing, in the same careful crayon, were 4 words written in a child's printing. I heard her smile. Ava read it 3 times, then 4 times. On the 5th reading, something inside her broke open. Not in the sharp way of the airplane, but in the way of something finally, completely releasing. She sat down in her leather office chair, the drawing trembling slightly in her hands, and she cried. These weren't the tears of before, not the tears of breakdown or helplessness or the shattering of her carefully constructed identity. These were different, softer, the tears that come when you finally understand that you've been loved all along, that someone saw you completely and chose to affirm it anyway. I heard her smile. Zara had heard the moment when Ava's armor cracked, had recognized the exact instant when a billionaire stopped performing and started being. And rather than judge it or exploit it or diminish it, She had simply witnessed it, held it, remembered it, with the honesty and clarity that only a 3-year-old could possess. Ava stood, still holding the drawing, and moved to the far wall of her office where she'd hung a single photograph in a simple frame. It was the image from the gala, Zara and Luna sitting together, both holding plush bunnies, Bun Bun and a new companion. Both smiling that smile of children who understood each other completely. The contrast of their skin tones, the visible weight of their different worlds, and underneath it all, the absolute recognition that class and race and circumstance meant nothing compared to the frequency of love. She placed Zara's drawing directly beside the photograph. The composition was perfect, the abstract musical notes from the crayon drawing seeming to emanate from the photograph, as if the image itself had suddenly found its voice. Ava stood back and looked at them together. The photograph that documented a moment the world had witnessed, and the drawing that captured what no photograph ever could, the internal experience of being truly heard. She thought of her mother, Eleanor, singing in a hospital room. She thought of Rosa teaching her daughter the listening song. She thought of Monique holding Zara with the kind of presence that no money could purchase. She thought of a 2-year-old girl in a sunflower hoodie who had understood, with absolute clarity, that a stranger's pain was an invitation rather than a burden. She thought of Luna, now walking and talking, carrying in her small body the lived experience of being soothed by presence rather than solutions. And Ava understood, finally, completely what it meant to be truly powerful. Sometimes, it takes a stranger's kindness to remind you what your billions can't buy. It's not innovation or disruption or market dominance. It's not even solutions. It's the sound of a heart being understood. It's the moment when someone looks at your deepest vulnerability and doesn't turn away. It's the recognition that loneliness is universal, but so is the capacity to listen. I built an empire on the idea that I could solve anything with enough intelligence and resources. But Zara taught me that the only thing worth solving for is connection. The only technology that matters is presence. And the only power that actually transforms anything is the power to truly, completely listen. Ava stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of her penthouse, the drawing and photograph visible in her peripheral vision. Below her, London glowed, the Thames reflecting the city lights, the skyline stretching endlessly, billions of lives moving through their own stories of loneliness and connection, and the desperate hope that someone, somewhere, would truly hear them. Behind her, Luna babbled softly to herself, playing with wooden blocks on the plush carpet. No nanny nearby, no screens, just a mother and daughter, existing together in the same space, breathing the same air, building something simple and true. And from the speakers embedded in the wall, playing so softly it was almost subliminal, the listening song began. SHHHHH. It's okay. Baby. Don't cry. I'm here. I listen. The melody moved through the penthouse like water finding its way home, like an ancient lullaby remembering its purpose, like a song that had been waiting generations to be sung at exactly this moment, in exactly this place, for exactly this woman who had finally learned how to hear. Ava closed her eyes and listened, not to the music, not to Luna's babbling, not to the city sounds drifting up from below. She listened to the silence underneath it all, the sacred space where hearts speak to each other in a language that has no words. And in that listening, she found what she'd been searching for her entire life. Not achievement, not power, not empire, but home. Finally, after 35 years of running, she was home. I know you enjoyed this story to have stayed till this time. Now don't go with subscribing. Subscribe now and keep receiving beautiful stories like this. Thank you.